This hasn't happened since the Great Depression, and it's bad. Now, when you hear talk about recessions and depressions, the Great Depression is always, and it's still the benchmark. And while we have many other caused by and affecting, different parts of the market and the economies, I believe that the markets after the Great Depression are the closest to what we're seeing right now. So it's where you want to spend your time studying and analyzing. And when you do that, you're gonna realize that there are some charts that we haven't seen this bad. Actually, they're worse than even the Great Depression. So in this video, I'm gonna break down the comparisons that we're seeing today with the Great Depression. We're gonna look at the charts that you need to be keeping an eye on to know exactly where things are headed and what to do. And then we're gonna take a look at some practical ways that you can not just survive, but thrive through this process, regardless of what happens. So let's go. Welcome to the channel. If you're new, my name is Mark Moss. I make these videos, of course, to change the way you think about money because, yes, almost everything you've learned is wrong. But if you can learn to see the information differently and understand what it means, then we can survive and thrive just like the rich do, okay? We don't have to be victims by this. I do want to say just real quick, I've taken the last couple years of my financial coaching and research that I've done, and I've put it together in what I call a system. And so you can systematically build wealth, basically on autopilot, regardless of what happens. I've taken all my tools, my sheets, my trackers, everything, and put it into what I'm calling the Sovereign OS operating system. If you want to be sovereign, financially free, where you can do what you want, direct your life and not be subject to the whims, you need this Sovereign operating system. Check it out. I put it all together. I'm pretty excited about it. There's a link down below, just a short video. You can see what it's all about. I'd love for you to check it out. Click on the link down below. Jumping into the video, talking about the Great Depressions. Before the Great Depression was the Roaring 20s. The 20s was a decade of optimism and technological innovation. There was electrification. It was beginning to hit mass adoption. Cars, radio, telephone adoption, all that was happening. We had talking pictures, like they were even making waves. There was huge advances made in aviation and travel. It was, after all, the era of sliced bread, which was, of course, the best thing since wrapped bread. Not even the recession of August 1929, spurred in part, of course, by the Fed's aggressive tightening, could temper the wave of enthusiasm. Instead, the Dow kept on climbing. From January 1st, 1928 to September 3rd, 1929, they saw the Dow rise by 87%. That's almost double. Now, again, this was despite the Fed reducing its balance sheet by 75%. Sound familiar, right? And then you probably know what happened next. On October 24th, 1929, the stocks plunged. After they crashed, though, things seemed to settle down for a bit. Most thought that the worst was behind them. But as we now know, this crash was just the beginning. By March 4th, 1933, practically all U.S. banks were either closed or under restrictions. On March 6, 2 days later, about 36 hours after being inaugurated, President Roosevelt issued Proclamation 2039, and the proclamation ordered a nationwide banking holiday, effective immediately. Banking holiday, it's not a good thing because for the next week, Americans were unable to access any banking services, no withdrawals, no transfers, no deposits, no money. Now, this was a huge shock to everybody, of course. Few people thought that they would ever see it get this bad. But here's why I'm telling you this. Today, we're seeing very similar events unfold right before our very eyes, and a lot of people think that this time is different, and I agree with them. This time is different. As a matter of fact, it looks like it's way worse. So let me explain. If you want to understand money and markets and where things are going, you have to understand the money supply. Some of the best investors in the world, like Stanley Druckenmiller, have really followed liquidity flows to understand what drives the markets. And so let me break this down for you. Let's talk about the mechanics of M2. M2 is the money supply. The M2 money supply basically keeps tabs on how much money is floating, is sloshing around that can be quickly turned into cash. So that includes, cash in your wallet, but it also things like your savings accounts and other short-term deposits. Why should we care about this? Well, the M2 money supply is like a financial health check for the economy. It gives us a peek into how much cash is available and how freely money is moving around. Now, on the flip side, if M2 drops by a lot, it's probably a red flag. Fewer funds are available for people to borrow and spend, which could mean that our economy is hitting the brakes, maybe hitting the wall. Now, for years, the M2 money supply, M2, has been a go-to guide for policymakers and analysts and the like. I've referenced it many times, of course, in my videos, and it helps them get a feel for how the economy's pulse is. It helps them make decisions about monetary policy, helps them keep an eye on financial stability, and decode the trends about inflation and deflation. But here's what the mainstream media won't tell you about the M2 money supply. I call it the big lie. Now look at this chart of the US M2 money supply from 1970 until today. Now remember, M2 is only one of the many variables that influence the flow of capital in the economy, but it's a big one. Since the beginning of 2008, the M2 money supply is up about 185%. It's a lot of new money. You know what else is also up by 185%? The S&P 500. Look at the incredible correlation between the S&P 500 and the M2 money supply. Adjusted for M2 inflation, the S&P 500 is actually below its 2006 levels. What does that mean? Put simply, what it means is that investment gains in the S&P 500 haven't been gains at all. If you take into account the M2 money supply expansion, all you're doing is simply tracking the monetary inflation rate, and that's if you're lucky. Now, if you look at it through this lens, most of our growth since 1970 has really just been stagnation behind monetary expansionary policies. But there's more. It gets even crazier. Here's a chart showing the S&P corrected for the M2 money supply going back all the way to the 1920s. Now, if you adjust for M2, the S&P has never taken out the 1929 high. It's insane. You're probably wondering what this has to do with the Great Depression. Well, if we zoom in even closer to 1929, we see something pretty shocking. You can see in 1931, the M2 money supply melted down into negative territory. Now, this is an unmistakable indicator that trouble's ahead. When money goes up, prices go up. When money goes down, things start crashing. Now, in fact, this same thing happened during all of the worst financial crises in American history. The panic of 1893, panic of 1907, the depression of 1920, and it's happening again. And it's not only that. Yes, there's more. The M2 money supply in 2023 has decreased by 2.6%, marking the steepest drop since the year of 1933. Now, 2.6 doesn't sound like a lot, but it is. It's the direction that's important. Keep in mind that this is only the fifth time in 153 years. It's the first time in 90 years that M2 has declined by at least 2% on a year-over-year basis. Now, while this decline in money supply probably seems very tiny compared to how much the M2 expanded 2 years ago, it also probably signals a recession or worse. Just because it expanded by that much and it's only gone down by a little bit, it doesn't matter as much as, like I said, the direction. Now, why is it signaling this? Well, because the Federal Reserve is doing the exact same thing it did in 1931, and it hasn't done it once since. And what is that? Well, the Fed is hiking aggressively while M2 is taking a nosedive, which is what really kicked off the Great Depression. So no surprise, declines in the M2 money supply have also been associated with bank failures. And despite recent bank failures, policymakers continue to remain optimistic about the health of the economy, just like they were in 1930. Surprise, surprise. I want to give you part of a joint statement released by the Treasury, the Fed, and the FDIC on March 12th, made in response to the failure of SVB. They said, quote, "The U.S. banking system remains resilient and on a solid foundation, in large part due to reforms that were made after the financial crisis that ensured better safeguards for the banking industry. Those reforms, combined with today's actions, demonstrate our commitment to take the necessary steps to ensure that depositors' savings remain safe." When the government's telling you that you're safe, when the government's telling you everything's okay, they're probably reassuring you because things aren't safe and things aren't okay. Let's go back in history and let's compare that statement to the 1929 State of the Union address that President Herbert Hoover gave. He said, quote, "Fortunately, the Federal Reserve System had taken measures to strengthen the position against the day when speculation would break, which together with the strong position of the banks has carried the whole credit system through the crisis without impairment." End quote. But there's a few differences between today and 1930. And yeah, this time it's worse. So let me show you. During the Great Depression, the median income in the United States was $5,000. Imagine getting by on $5,000. However, of course, adjusted for inflation, that's equal to about $88,000 in today's dollars. The very fact that I even have to say that is just ridiculous. In today's dollars, shouldn't a dollar be a dollar? However, that's adjusted to $88,000 in today's dollars. The problem is that today, the median income in the United States is about $56,000. So the average income has gone down from $88,000 to 56. And while you're letting that sink in, also think about some other less obvious parallels like the homeless encampments of the Great Depression. Now, I don't know where you're living, but in California, we have them littered throughout every major city, San Francisco, Los Angeles. It's a war zone. I've never seen anything like it. And here's a picture of one right outside San Francisco City Hall. There's also hidden hobo camps everywhere that most people don't even really notice. There's also bread lines in the Great Depression, and today we have virtual bread lines. As a matter of fact, 50 million people in the US depend on food stamps and food banks. Now, the total cost of the SNAP food stamp program from 1969 to 2021, you can see it there, and it is big. But the biggest difference between the Great Depression and today is that today the Fed is willing to act more aggressively today than they were back in 1930s, which means one thing: Jerome Powell gonna get that money printer to go burr, right? It means that we're very likely to see the Fed rev up the money printers yet again. As a matter of fact, it's the only way. I've talked about this in many videos. I've given you the charts, I've shown you the graphs. As I've been saying, the only two certainties in life are death and taxes, and now we have three: death, taxes, and money printing. And as I've warned about previously, a period of massive stagflation, even worse than what we've seen in the past few decades. And so you should prepare accordingly. But what does that mean, prepare accordingly? Well, again, going back and studying the history, we can see that in periods with high inflation, financial assets did very well, like the S&P 500. I mean, at least it kept up with the inflation. We can see that value-based stocks and commodities did much better. And yes, even real estate did really well, especially when you could lock it in with very low interest rates, especially when you add the leverage on top of that. Now, also businesses can be inflation resistant because, of course, you can just raise your prices as long as it's somewhat recession proof. So think about like staples that people are going to need regardless of what the market or the economy is doing. And remember, more millionaires are made in depressions than at the peaks of markets. When markets are going crazy, everybody's very happy, everybody's optimistic, but it's too late. Most of the wealth is made in the depressions, in the recessions. And so that is the time we want to be building. You have to get it right though. You have to have a system, you have to have a plan. But rather than looking at this as something of being fearful about, and I know I've had people comment in my comments down below, please leave me a comment and say, you seem to be almost happy about this. Look, I'm not happy about any of this. I wish the Fed would shut down. They would leave us with sound money. They could leave this alone. They pump the markets. They crash the markets. They ruin millions of people. I've got caught up in it before. I'm not happy about this, but having a plan to survive this and even profit from this, I mean, I'm ready to navigate it. And you should be too. Hopefully that helps you. And like I said, I've taken about the last couple of years of coaching that I do with my financial clients, taken all the charts, all the graphs, all the tools, and we've created a system so you can become financially free, or what I call financially sovereign. So none of this will affect you. I call it the Sovereign OS operating system. I'd love for you to check it out. I put together a short video that kind of breaks down what's inside of this Sovereign OS. There's a link down below. Just watch the short video. It kind of explains all that. Either way, you need to have a plan and a system because it's happening. It's happening. The money printing is inevitable. They are not going to practice austerity. Stagflation is the most likely case, but we're going to be okay. Let me know in the comments down below what you're going to do about it. Of course, as always, give me a thumbs up if you like the video. If you don't, you can give me a thumbs down. That's okay, but at least tell me why in the comments. Subscribe if you're not already subscribed to the channel, and that's what I got to your success. I'm out.